We're so happy that you could join us tonight for our first session of our Remote Learning in Action series. Tonight's topic is interactive networking, a small group instruction. I'd like to introduce our team as we work together with you this evening. My name is Colleen Whalen. I'm one of the literacy consultants at Wayne Risa. And co-hosting with me today is Mary Lou Strimble, who you saw just a little earlier. Also, in addition to Mary Lou and myself, we have Laura Gabriel and Michelle Wagner. They're doing a lot of the behind the scenes work for us to make sure our hour goes smoothly. We also have our supervisor, Mary Treese, in attendance, and we're so happy to see so many of you in our session this evening. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll find this time of refreshment and renewal as we talk and learn together with one another as we continue our time together. One thing we like to always begin with are agreements within our learning space. And it's really important to set norms and routines, as you know, as classroom teachers. What are you using to support your students and to provide a safe academic space? We often lean into these norms and agreements to help build trust and to lessen the stress environment. It allows us to have opportunity for processing information and get down to the deep work. As we lean into each other's expertise tonight and during our networking time, please remember to provide a space that all voices are lifted. Engage in that humble inquiry. Make decisions that are best about the kids we touch each and every day. Stay engaged, and of course, take care of yourself. As we continue on, we want to make sure we're in the same space and review the outcomes for our time together. We will spend some time reviewing the research. What do we know is best practice about small group instruction? Whether it's content-based, interest-based, ability-based, we know there's research out there and we need to follow it. We also want to really reflect on small group practices, thinking about our different learning spaces this year. Remote, virtual, face-to-face, what is working for us and what might be some barriers we can overcome. And then lastly, we'll spend some time together sharing and learning from one another, those research-based small group instructional practices to really lift our practices. One thing we've learned over our time in these last few months is to really think about engaging everyone in our space. We know how important it is to build motivation and engagement, certainly with our students, but also with us as adult learners. We want to make sure we're providing an opportunity to have low risk but high engagement, building fellowship with our small group setting. We want you to consider this quote. It's by Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead is an American cultural anthropologist. She was an author and speaker in the mass media during the 60s and 70s. And what we know about anthropology, it's the study of humans, aspects of humans within past and present societies. And a quote that has resonated with us and probably one you've heard in the past. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. What a beautiful quote to consider, to think through as we embark on small group instruction tonight. So we'd like you to just take a moment, again, think about that quote. We're going to place you in small breakout sessions. Introduce yourself, tell people what you do. What is your purpose in this teaching world? And then how does this quote resonate with you, either personally or professionally? How is working together in a small group really manifesting into this notion of changing the world? In a moment, you'll find a message that says you'll join a breakout session, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back from our breakout session during our Ignite activity. Trying to get to know who is part of our session this evening and really kind of thinking about how small groups have affected you, whether it was a personal experience or a professional experience. How has small group really paved the way to moving forward? We invited you when you first entered in to fill out a small little form just to give us some information about who is in attendance tonight. That will actually help us to know how to place you in breakout sessions in a few moments. We want to make sure you're really nestled in with a small group of people that are kind of in that same space as you are. Maybe if you're an elementary teacher, we'd like to keep our elementary folks together. Maybe you're a high school content teacher, we'd like to keep you kind of close together so you can really learn and build off of one another's experiences. So we have a quick little poll here just so we can kind of all see those ideas of your current role. And so if you could just take a moment and go ahead and jot down what your current role is as far as elementary or secondary. Maybe you are a support staff. Maybe you're coming from central office. We'd love to hear who's in attendance today. And as you can see on our screen, a lot of things are coming through here. It looks like the majority of our folks are elementary. We have a few coaches and interventionists and just a smattering of secondary education teachers. But it's really nice for us on our side to know who is in attendance so we can really gear some of our conversation around your learning space. All right, thank you so much for participating in that poll. And again, that will help guide us as we communicate further and talk a little bit more in depth about small group instruction. So what we'd like to really lay as our foundation when we really consider research-based practices, we really lean into the Mesa Gown Literacy Essentials. I hope all of you have had an opportunity to see the Literacy Essentials. If you have not, I'll have Laura place the literacyessentials.org link into the chat. We're really leaning heavily, Wayne Reese is leaning heavily into the work that the state is doing and really lifting the literacy practices across our state. And the Literacy Essentials are really our guideposts as we lean into research-based literacy instruction, as well as we know that there are other essentials that are available, including school-wide essentials, including pre-K, we have birth to 3, we have math essentials. There's a wealth of information that we're really leaning into when we look at these essentials. And really what we wanted to focus in heavily tonight is what you see on the screen as essential number 3 in our literacy essentials, which is focused on small group instruction. And when we consider small group instruction, we really want to think about a few key points from this essential. Mainly, small groups are formed flexibly based on current student needs. So really diving into that notion of making sure we're always aware of where our students are and making adjustments to where we might place them in a small group instruction. Maybe in the past, we've kept our small groups consistent and felt good about that consistency. But we know that kids are learning, ever changing, and it's important that we keep those groups just as flexible. We don't want to keep them stagnant. Another main point to think about for our small group instruction is really making sure our teachers are ensuring the students are spending the majority of their time doing real reading and real writing in that small group. Oftentimes, teachers want to take that lead role. They want to be the captain of the ship and do all of the talking. And what we know best about instruction is that the more time students are actually engaged in real reading and writing, the more effective the practice. And then what do we do as teachers? We're the facilitator, we are the guide on the side, we're watching and the kid watching, we're observing to see what students are doing and how we can move them forward. Another thing we really want to consider is providing targeted coaching, really looking at those individual needs. So, what we need to be aware of is that every minute counts during this small group instruction. We want to make our time short and focused, concise, and really be mindful of the prompts that we're using. How important our language is that we're giving to students, and how consistent we are with that language and how it connects to our lessons each and every day. One thing to consider is time analysis. How might time analysis help you to refine your small group instruction? I was just in a breakout session with our educators of our youngest children. Consider 5-year-olds in a small group instruction. Their time is shortened, right? They can't attend as long as we think we want them for. So we really have to be mindful of that time analysis. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Mary Lou as she dives in a little bit more into fluid and flexible grouping.
Thanks, Colleen. So as we think about purposefulness with our small groups and making sure that we're considering the types of small groups that we are helping our students to utilize, we want to make sure that we have a common understanding. And just recently, I had the pleasure of being in a session with Dr. Tanya Wright, who is a researcher for Michigan State University. And she used a really great metaphor that helped me understand the complexity of small group instruction. She said, you know, we got to think about small group instruction almost like the vision screening that we all took part in our schools. So think about it when you were in school and we all went down to the cafeteria, the library, and we had a vision screening. All students took part in that. Some students were notified that they needed glasses. So when they went to the doctor on that recommendation, did the doctor give every one of those students the same prescription to correct their vision barriers? No, that doctor had to look at each one of those students and say, what does that student need? They had to customize the prescription. And when Dr. Wright said that, I thought, yes, that makes sense. So as you think about implementing your small group instruction, we ask that you think about your students' particular prescriptions. What do each of your individual students need? So let's take a look at the 4 types of grouping that you see on the screen, and we're going to set some norming around definitions. The first one is level-based grouping. And these are groups where we have a progress monitoring tool or some type of formative assessment that levels our students. That might be, if you're familiar with Fontes and Pinnell, and you give the benchmark assessment and you find out what level your student is at in reading. Or possibly if you're teaching math and you have given some type of formative assessment for math and you find out that you have students that are at a level when they're adding fractions. So that's a level-based group. Those groups tend to, in the past, we've known that they tend to hold students for a longer period of time based on that level. The next type I'd like to talk about is needs-based. And that is when you have a student in a level-based, you might ask yourself, what does that student need? Particularly, what is their prescription to help move them along? So for instance, if you have some students that are having problems with decoding, you might look at those students and group them together based on the decoding. And then you would give some instruction around decoding and then give them an opportunity to practice. It could also be, let's go back to the math example. If you have some students that are having problems adding fractions, it might be because they don't understand the fraction to whole relationship. So then you would focus on that need. Moving on to interest-based. I always go to my science example for this. Let's say we have our students working on insects and science. And you have students who are in groups based on their topic or interest. Say you have a group that's beetles, a group that's bugs, and a group that is butterflies. And that's what their research is based on. So interest-based is based on what the students, the topic that they choose. Sometimes we generally see this with book clubs as well, if they're interested in a title and then they'll be in a book club. So that's interest-based. And then finally, when we talked about paired or partnered groups, that is really when we have two peers that are supporting each other. They could be reading to each other. In math, they might be working on a problem together and working through the way that they're going to present their problem. It could be in secondary. It could be where you have two students that are helping each other with their writing and they're able to give each other feedback. So those are some of the common definitions of the 4 types of grouping. We want to make sure, just like Colleen said, no matter what group we put our students in, what type, that it's focused on meaning making, higher order thinking skills, such as reflection or application. There should be a balance between that instruction and the applications. So the students have an opportunity to apply what they learned. Now, why not stick with level-based? Why should we look at flexible grouping? Well, the research is pretty clear, and here are some reasons why. When we think about putting students in levels, it's very approximate. There might be a variety of reasons why that child is testing out or landing on that level. For instance, maybe they are at that level because they didn't have enough prior knowledge with the topic, or for that matter, they had no interest in the topic. It could be that they don't identify with the topic or the text that they're working with, so there's no connectedness with that. Possibly it could be because the assessment tool is causing them anxiety. So if we only use level-based grouping and leave these students in those level-based groupings for too long, we're not giving them that specific prescription to help move them forward. Also, if we leave them in a level-based group, it doesn't offer opportunities to grapple with grade level text or content. Many times we find that students who are not given a variety of grouping end up having the lowest quality of instruction. And we know all students deserve high quality instruction. So we ask that they are given opportunities in other groups so they can begin to bring their problem solving skills into light and they are able to grapple with the grade level text. Because thinking about their self-perception, many times our lowest performing students have only access to less lower impactful instruction because we leave them in lower base level groups. And then finally, thinking about the research really does support a variety of groups. As we think about those variety of groups, we want to stop and ask ourselves, what is the success criteria for creating those groups and for the release of those groups? What formative assessment tools are we using when we're looking at the formation of those groups? Are we only using progress monitoring, or are we also using observation, annotated notes? How are we doing that? And another really big component that sometimes is not brought to the forefront is how are we communicating how groups are part of our learning environment? Are we allowing our students to know that being in a small group is not a negative? In our environment, it's a positive, and everyone in our learning family will have an opportunity to participate in small groups, that it is a benefit instead of a negative. So thinking about that communication piece. So at this point, we'd really like to slow it down a little bit because we've been talking for about 15 minutes. And what we'd like to do is give you some time to process yourself. Many times in a remote environment, we have a limited amount of time and we have content we have to get through. So we, as learners, Colleen and I, have really been mindful about stopping and giving some processing time. All right, now that we've had this time to stop and process and get ready to meet with our colleagues, one more thing Colleen and I wanted to share with you. Recently, she and I have been doing a book study around this book, The Distance Learning Playbook. If you have not had the opportunity to read this book yet, I can personally say I am enjoying this resource. And we came across this peer-to-peer learning norms guide that we thought we'd share with you this evening. So as we think about our norms that we use with our students as far as teacher and student interaction, we sometimes forget that there also has to be in breakout rooms peer-to-peer interactions. As educators, sometimes we have our students in breakout groups and we want to make sure that we're setting the norms and those agreements versus rules about what it should look like and sound like when we're in spaces and interacting with our peers. These need to be explicitly taught according to Fisher, Fry, and Hattie in their book. And they lean into the fact that these norms really do convey high expectations when we present them to students and revisit them. It also allows our students to understand that there's a mutual respect that is expected in these spaces. And it's an acknowledgement of the learning communities and their needs. And then it really does emphasize a collaborative spirit. So explicitly teaching these for our students, keeping them in the forefront, so not just once, but revisiting them continuously over time, and really letting our students know that we are mutually respecting each other when we're in these spaces.